Welcome to season 14 of the Parenting Aces podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Stone. And those of you who were following the French Open this year, hopefully you were following the junior side as well, may already know that the girls' champion at Roland Garros was a young player named Lilli Tagger. She is from Austria and she is a phenomenal talent. She won the final 6-2, 6-0 and did it in style, did it with grace, did it with a smile. And we have the pleasure this week of hearing from one of Lilli's early developmental coaches, Mark Carruthers. Mark is originally from Auckland, New Zealand, where my son lives, and grew up playing his junior tennis there. Unfortunately, he suffered an injury at a pretty young age, I think when he was around 16, that made him decide to leave the game of tennis. But as a lot of players do, he eventually found himself back into the sport on the coaching side of things. And after a lot of travel, a lot of adventure, found himself living in Austria, where he came across Lilli and her family. And Mark started working with Lilli and her older brother and older sister as their tennis coach. I won't tell you anymore, but I am so excited to have him on to talk about what it takes to develop a young player to be a Grand Slam champion. And that is what Mark did, and he shares his story with us in this week's episode. Before I bring him on, though, just a quick reminder, if you haven't, please sign up to receive our e-newsletter. You can do that on our website, ParentingAces.com. Also, I love doing one-to-one consults with you guys. So if that is something that would benefit you and your tennis family, you can set that up. You can purchase your sessions, again, through our website, ParentingAces.com. Just click on the shop tab at the top of the page and you'll see the different options available. Now, with all that, I want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy my very, very interesting and very, very eye-opening conversation with Coach Mark Carruthers. Mark, welcome to the podcast. It is a pleasure to meet you, and I am so excited to jump into our conversation today.
Thanks for having me on, Lisa. Really appreciate it.
Sure. So, as I do with all new guests on the podcast, I want to just start by asking you to share your tennis story with us, how you got started in this game and what you're currently doing with it.
Well, being from New Zealand, my family was really into rugby. However, my mum came from a tennis family in New Zealand, and one summer she just got sick of me being around the house. So being a tennis player herself, she found the club to send me off, and my brothers eventually followed, and I just got hooked straight away. I had no idea what I was doing. I'd watched a little bit on TV and eventually got into it, showed some good ability, and then took like the natural path where I started to play tournaments and compete, did well. But I was just really doing it on, just everything by instinct, nothing very technical. And eventually, I found my way into the tennis system in Auckland and then into New Zealand tennis system. Played a lot of junior tournaments all around the world, won national titles, things like that. And did very well and had plans to take it as far as I could, but had some bad injuries, and then that led to some other issues which are tough to deal with at a young age when you're facing a difficult injury. And at a certain point, I just decided I'd lost too much ground to other players who I'd competed against, and went to university and forgot about tennis for many years. But after finishing school, I had a degree in journalism, and I ended up working. My first job actually was at a couple of pro events in New Zealand shortly before the Australian Open, where I did print and eventually like radio media. And that kind of got me following the sport again. And I'd been doing some coaching to just earn some money through university, and one thing led to another. And found myself off on a plane to Canada, where I basically began coaching, and things kind of snowballed from there.
Wow. And now you are in Austria, of
Yeah.
all places. Like, how did you wind up there?
Well, actually, the last year I worked in Austria, the last year I worked in Canada coaching. My wife came over to work at the resort, and I met her there, and things kind of clicked, and I had a decision to make where I was like, well, okay, what am I going to do at the end of the season? Because I'm pretty sure she's not going to come back and hang with me for another season at this resort. And so I started following her around, and that led me to Hong Kong and Singapore, where I also worked. And eventually, I had to grow up and had to make a call. Do I follow her back to Austria, or do we try and start a life in New Zealand? And being in tennis and fully being into the whole coaching scene at that time, Europe always made more sense because, it's one of the capitals of the tennis world. And that's how I ended up close to Kitzbühel in Austria.
Wow. Quite an adventure.
Yeah.
You've lived and traveled a lot, which is super cool. The reason for us having this conversation today, though, is because you reached out to me at the end of Roland Garros, which we are recording this a couple days after the completion of the tournament, even though it's not airing for a few weeks. And you were telling me that the young woman who won the junior women's title there, junior girls title at Roland Garros, is someone that you coached and helped develop her game. And I thought this would be such a cool story to talk about how you got involved with Lilli and what her junior development process looked like. And so I'm going to just ask you, first of all, how did you get connected with Lilli and her family? And then we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I was actually coaching another girl at the time. And by coaching and training, I mean, the girls were very, very young. And she'd invited, Lilli was one of her friends, and invited her to come and practice with us for 2 hours. And I had no idea who this young girl was. And Lilli was 9 at the time. And they practiced for a couple of hours. And luckily for me, because my German still wasn't that hot at that period, her mum speaks perfect English. So does her dad. But her mum was there. And after watching them, for maybe an hour or something like that, I just turned to her mum and I told him, like, you realize your daughter should be hitting a one-handed backhand, right? And her mum just kind of looked at me, and I thought, I was like, I stuck my foot in it straight away. And she actually said, well, funnily, you say that, Mark, Lilli always wants to play with one hand. She was a huge Federer fan as a little girl. And I was just watching her, and I was just thinking, like, looking the way this girl was trying to play, very, very raw at the very young age of 9. But I'm like, this girl, all she wants to do is come to the net. She was slicing like, a typical one-handed player would, watching the way she's volleying. And I mean, this is all, in a very short space of time. So this is within like 2 hours. And I was just thinking, I was like, oh, this is something different. You don't see this every day. And, I would eventually, I made a connection, and her and her older sister and brother, who were also very good players, they started coming and training with a group of kids I had. And I just thought that this girl had, something like you can't teach. So she was a very tall, great athlete, and she was trying to play in a way where you were watching her, and it was completely nuts at the time what she was trying to do. But you were thinking, it was like, oh my God, if this girl got the direction and someone gave her the freedom and the time to pursue this, then you could create something or help her develop into something which you wouldn't typically see in the women's game. Now, it went on for a couple of months like that, and we didn't really train that much. She would just come and hang out in my group, really. But I would just always talk with her mum and her dad, and I would say, it was like, I think she should play with one hand. And when we started training a little bit more and I started to take her by herself, I would always try and get her to work on her two-hander, and you just couldn't get her to practice it. Now, it was because it was a bad shot, but you could just see that she had no interest in really developing the shot. But if you said, hey, Lilli, let's work on the slice, or let's volley, or, let's hit a whole bunch of drop shots, then she was like, oh, okay, great. And, I would talk to her, just make the occasional comment about playing with one hand, and she wanted to play with one hand. And I think this is one of the most underrated things with people are saying, well, how can you take a young girl and put her to one hand on the backhand? It's just about the craziest thing you can do in tennis. And I think people just forget, especially coaches, that it's the kids' tennis. It's not the coach's tennis. And I was a guy that was just starting to work with her, was very curious about how she was playing and her potential. And I was just having conversations with her and just observing her. And then eventually when I'd say, you know what, let's hit a couple of one-handers. And she'd just kill the ball. And you looked at it and you're like, she didn't know the first thing about doing it, but it was natural. The swing was good. The grip was good. The ball would go all over the court. Like you had no idea where it was going, but that wasn't the point. And one of the things I kind of started to develop in my own head was like, here's a very talented young girl who wants to attack, who wants to take risks. I thought if you didn't encourage her to do it and try and really lead her down that path, then maybe someone would grab this girl who was going to be very good and stick her in some type of cage. And that cage might not allow her talent to come out, which was, you'd have to be blind not to see it at that period of time. And, I think she told the story at the French Open that she played a tournament and, we're always talking about it like with one hand, but she was still playing with two hands. And, she won the tournament, and then, she just wrote me when she got home. She's like, oh, Mark, I'm gonna try and start playing with one hand. And, I thought, I thought it was a great decision. It was her decision. Like, did I try and manipulate her to obviously really do it and convince her, her parents to allow her to try it? Yeah, sure I did. Just because I just thought it was the right way to go. And, if she did that with one hand, obviously it's an extremely hard thing to do in tennis. And I mean, a girl that just turned 10 at the time is one of the factors which I didn't think, be obvious straight away, is this would really help her develop a work ethic. And because it was something she was going to have to work at, but she would enjoy it. So she would love this thing she was trying to develop, rather than me telling her, Lilli, let's work on this two-hander. And where both of us knew she's like, a girl just wants to hit one-handers. So, I mean, that was the beginning of the story. And everything just kind of, it went from there. I mean, to say it was smooth sailing is definitely not true, because people knew in Austria who she was, the expectations of her. I mean, she wasn't doing tennis to just be a decent under 12 player. You could see that she had her sights set very high and the expectations were high. And, to take a girl that was winning everything at that time and then say, we're going to make a decision to hit one hand. Yeah, there was massive amounts of blowback in Austria. But, that's, I honestly thought it was a genius decision by her, and I was fully behind it. And I thought at the time it made perfect sense. And the more people challenged it and the more people said, this is absolutely crazy what you're doing, the more convinced I became that this was the right thing to do.
Well, I mean, big kudos to you and to her parents for listening to a then 9 or 10-year-old and letting the child kind of lead the process of developing her game, because most coaches, like you said, wouldn't do that. They would enforce their way of training, their way of developing on somebody that obviously, as you said, had her mind pretty made up that this was the path she wanted to take. And I've alluded to this before, but I recently heard Andy Rodic talk about his serve and where his serve came from, and how lucky he was to have a coach that let him run with that non-traditional service motion that was born out of anger and frustration, and didn't try to put him back into the trophy position box of perfect serves, And I think a lot of coaches could learn from this, that yes, you're the coach, yes, you're the professional, yes, you have the experience, but sometimes the player, you have to really pay close attention, because they're going to tell you what type of player they're going to become.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the great, one of the great things about tennis is it's such an individual sport. And honestly, at the time when I begun this with Lilli, I was coaching long enough and I thought I had started to gain enough confidence where someone giving me answers like, look, Mark, tennis doesn't work like this. And I would say, I mean, I wasn't a professional player myself, and I'm a huge outsider in Austria, not being a local. And I would say, okay, why? And a common answer I would get was, well, I played and this is the way it goes. And I was just fed up with that answer. And, I agree. I knew the Andy Rodic story and the Pete Sampras story with Robert Lansdorp. And, I'd always paid attention and just been a huge fan of attacking tennis. And, when Lilli decided to do this, and I was like, okay, Lilli, we're going to have to do that. We're going to do this. It's going to be very hard. You're going to lose. The ball is going to go all over the place, but I don't care. You're 10 years of age. The goal is not this. The goal is X, and we're going to back you. We're going to give you the time. And we were very confident she was going to do it, because I always thought of the people who had really good one-handers, and if I just take women, wouldn't necessarily be their best shot, but they were top shots. Like, no one could say from top women players that Gabriela Sabatini didn't have a great one-hander. Steffi Graf didn't have a great slice. Mauresmo didn't have a great one-hander. Henin, Lilli's coach now, Francesca Schiavone, have a great one-hander. And this was, I always used to, just remind Lilli, and also, remind myself that some of the reasons people were giving that a girl can't do this is just not valid, because history shows, great women players playing with one hand. And, I've no doubt that she's definitely got the ability to, hopefully one day live up to like the potential in the professional game, and playing with one hand and, playing an incredibly creative brand of tennis at the same time.
Can you talk a little bit about the conversations you were having with Lilli's mom and dad during this process? Because you said how you told Lilli, we're not worrying about wins and losses at this point. This is a process. What happens in the 10 and unders is irrelevant in the big scheme of things. Yeah. But getting parents to understand that and support that sometimes is the missing link in developing a player to their potential. The coach knows what they want to do. They have the conversation with the kid. The kid's bought in, but all the parents are seeing is all these kids that my kid used to beat, now she's losing to them. What are we doing here?
Yeah. It's a great question. And a lot of times as well, when you're just working with kids, if you're a coach, what you're really doing is you're evaluating the parents and you're interviewing the parents. So, I was very fortunate that she's got a great mum and dad who are also very good tennis players in their own right in Austria. And I lived, she was 90 minutes drive from where I trained. So one time a week I would drive there and I would coach her and her brother and sister. And then I would always speak with her mum and dad a lot afterwards, and, just always fill them in and communicate what I thought of things, how things were going, what did they think. And then 2 times a week, they would come drive over to me. So, it's quite a journey when you think about it each week. And we would always spend some time like talking about it. And I mean, I had the advantages as well that they spoke perfect English, so I could do everything in English. And we spent, many months, just talking, getting to know each other, obviously before we did it. But they were very supportive, and they understood how tennis worked. That, as you said, under 10, under 12, this doesn't mean anything. What you want to track is, I always say, like, I mean, who is she as a person? She's a very open, creative person, and I think the job should be to let that come out on the court. And I just always try and make the point as well that, I mean, people underestimate the importance of time. And if you make a decision where it's like, look, okay, this is who she is, this is her goal, she's decided to do one hand, everyone's going to criticize her because the ball's going to go in the back fence, it's going to go bottom of the net. But then she's going to give you a glimpse of hitting like the ball like an absolute queen for 5 minutes. And that little 5 minutes that you'll get once in a while, that shows like what is possible if you just get out of her way, give her time, be incredibly patient with her, and basically do what 99.9% of the other people aren't doing. Whereas you just work very patiently and diligently towards some type of vision, which has come from the player and which the coach and the parents are all on board with. And I mean, if I think back at like that time, we were the only people who thought this was a good idea. I would say the whole coaching community, basically probably thought I was completely out of my mind, that what we were trying to do. But, it doesn't matter what other people think. We believed in it. And most importantly, she believed in it, and, just worked unbelievably hard to make it happen.
What I'm hearing from you too, though, is that you developed a trust, not just with Lilli, but also with her mom and dad, so that when you would say to them, A is going to happen, then B is going to happen, then C is going to happen, we just have to let those things happen because they're taking us to this end goal that she has set for herself. They believed you, and they supported the process.
Yeah. It's, I mean, at the time, it was like we just had very good communication. We're very open with each other. And with the first year, I mean, when she was 10 years old and she was doing it, it was rough because, I mean, I was, you got this girl who everyone knew had the potential to be a very, very good player. It was just losing to everyone, but occasionally showing glimpses. And it was like, look, you couldn't really do anything apart from just, look, we just send her back out there. Just send her back out there, let her play, let her compete, and eventually it's going to stick. Because, I mean, from a coaching perspective, many people can say, well, why would you ever change, a girl, or why would you change from 2 hands to 1 hand, or things like this? But I always thought from a coaching perspective, it was the easiest shot to teach. And I think you can tell straight away if someone's got the ability to hit the one-hander and really develop it into an extremely special shot. And you could just see it if you were working with her each week. And I mean, she was on the court with her dad, the whole dad, sister, everyone, just hitting balls the whole time, just trying to get it down, just putting in repetition after repetition after repetition. And if you were just following her closely, you could just slowly see it coming together. And so,
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but how did you keep her wanting to come back if she was losing? Because I think that's really tough on a young kid. Especially when you were winning before and now you're losing, and what's going on. And how do I stick to my guns on this? Because if I go back to this other thing, maybe I'm going to go back to winning again.
It's true, but I mean, this is the thing. I mean, if you're coaching, you're getting to know a kid and you're trying to form some type of vision and plan. I never met anyone who loved to play tennis more than she did. So a part of it was hers. Yes, of course, she's a very competitive person, and it hurts to go through a process she went through, which is very, very tough. But just the bottom line is Lilli loved tennis. And if you
Do
said
you
to
remember
Lilli,
what you were saying to her though through that time of
I mean, all
losing?
I was saying was that I felt personally, my own personal feeling at the time was I wanted her to succeed maybe more than she did, because I think as a coach as well, you don't get that many chances to really to try and help someone who you think has the potential to do something very special, to really be a part of that and try and guide them through that. And I just say, look, just keep hitting it. Everyone's wrong. I was like, you're 100% right what you're doing. The more people who say this is a bad idea, they haven't looked at the history of tennis, and they're just taking convenient snapshots to fit, a well-known narrative around girls tennis. And, so part of me felt as a coach, the other part felt also as like a big brother, is, you knew what people were saying. And so I felt it was also as well, like very, protective of what she was trying to do, because I wouldn't go and travel with her to every tournament. But once you could see she was starting to put it into practice and put it into matches, then I would say, okay, now let's, try and see how you're doing it in competition, in tournaments. And the more it started to, she started to show the evidence that it was coming together, then tournaments, and I knew what people were saying. And so I felt, I wanted as much as I could from the outside to try and protect her and just encourage her and be like, look, this is your tennis, it's no one else's tennis. It doesn't matter. If you've got an idea of, if she ever said, she wanted to go back to two hands, I probably would have said, look, I think you're making a mistake, but it's not my tennis, Lilli. I'm just a guy here to help you. And as long as you want my help, if you want to do A, B, or C, as long as it's not starting to, play with a left hand or something like that, then my job is just to help you. And,
Right.
to the best of my ability, and maybe give you a little bit of wisdom that maybe I've found through the years. So that was just the crux of the message.
But there had to have been something magic in there. Either she was incredibly mature at a young age, and I've never met her, so all I've done is watch her on TV. But at that young age, to believe your coach, to convince your parents, when I don't know if they took convincing, but somehow they were on board with this, even though she was losing. And, we know going to tournaments is not cheap. You don't want to go and play one match and go home. I mean, it's too expensive, it's too time consuming. So there's some magic, something in there that helped her stay strong and stand behind her convictions that what she was doing was the correct thing to be doing.
Yeah, and I always thought at the time, I agree with you. And one of the reasons is that's why I think it worked, because sometimes things just magically fit together in a perfect little jigsaw puzzle. And that's one of those occasions where this is something which is meant to happen. And I just thought, I always thought, some kids are just born to play with one hand. And I think the thing that kept it going as well is, I mean, I was always of the opinion too that, if you wanted to play a certain way and you wanted to play a certain style, and this was who you really identified with, you would work to make it happen. But if someone was going to force you to play another style, eventually you knew this wasn't you. It wasn't part of your personality. It would never come out under pressure. And I think, the thing, especially the first year, that kept it going is we just said, look, if you want to play at a really top level, there's a couple of things you need to do. The ball needs to go fast. You need to play attacking tennis. You can't be scared on a big point to go for your shot. No great player's ever been that. So all the things which people basically save for later, I always tried to push the view and encourage you as like, look, we're going to do this now because I don't care about these tournaments. What I care about is what you care about, which is the big picture. And I think too, that's why, a lot of people in tennis, a lot of people in tennis will get very average results because people will follow a convenient narrative. They will play it safe. And, she's a very, very tough kid mentally at that age to just, she had a vision for herself and she was going to see it through and she's going to do things her way. And I was just massively proud of her the whole time. Each time she would go out there and play, and the better and better she got, then I was like, this girl's doing it her way. And to me, that was always what made tennis a great sport, is McEnroe, Lendl, Agassi, Sampras, Nadal, Federer. There was the contrast. And this was the cool thing with her is, I always thought it was hilarious where you would go to tournaments and you're being in Europe, summer, she's competing on clay the whole time. And here's this small kid, half falling backhands at the baseline, serving and volleying, laughing, and just giving herself time and just being a kid and not taking things overly seriously. And somewhere in her brain, like she obviously knew, she's like, this is going to take time and she's going to have some fun with it. And to hell with what anyone else was going to say about it. And
that's amazing.
Just massive credit.
Yeah, for sure. And to you, to her parents also for, not caving to what everybody else is saying. Because there is a lot of pressure, as you said, you're at these tournaments, you hear the chatter, her friends are talking, the other parents are talking, the other coaches are talking. It's amazing. How long did it take before she was able to have everything kind of click into place and she started winning again?
That's a great question. I would say it took a good year. And she started when she'd made the decision and she said, look, Mark, I want to do this. The first thing we did is she actually came to where I coached, and I think it was a Saturday, and we spent 4 hours on the court. We did 4 hours straight, her and I, and she was 10 years old at the time. So, and this gives you like some idea of the concentration and the determination that she had inside of her. And we did 4 hours straight on the backhand, how you change the grip, things like this. The next week, at the end of 4 hours, I'm watching her hit this. I'm like, oh my God, this is, it's only, from the basket, and literally as well playing rallies with a red ball. But I just thought this was going to be spectacular. I was convinced straight away. She played a tournament, I think, the following week, if I'm not mistaken. And by the end of the first year, you could start to see it come together. And by come together, like, okay, if the ball was hit on the backhand, you were thinking like, yeah, the return of serve is coming. She's starting to just do whatever she wants to do within a rally, whether that was she'd start looping the ball cross, kill one down the line. She always had a great slice. You didn't really have to do much there apart from just stay out of the way and just let her be herself. But you could just slowly start to see after 1 year that she was starting to piece it together. And then I think it took, I traveled with her, was with her a lot that next year. and I was just observing her in practice, and you were just starting to see in practice that, she could handle more speed. She could play more effectively against her older sister. She was always a brilliant doubles player. And, you could see when she was fully able to attack, how freely and how creatively she would play with it. And the second year was when you started to see that she was getting confident and putting it into matches. Now, I mean, if you think of it, at the time, the girl was only 11 and she's playing on bouncy European clay where, any coach with half a brain who wanted his kid to win a match is like, look, loop this girl on the backhand and she'll commit suicide, which is what would happen. But you didn't care. You just like, look, all this kid needs is time. So, I mean, and I think this is one of the things that, is a shame with tennis is kids don't get given the time to maybe develop something that they truly love to do. And instead of having, kids being kids in junior tennis where there's huge imperfections, what I know, I was never a fan of this and really try to fight against it every day, is these little pre-packaged under 12 tennis players who all play the same, and it's all very safe and it looks like all nice, but you're thinking tennis doesn't work like this at the later stages. So I'm like, I don't even understand the point of doing this. But I mean, that's why her and I stuck and it worked well, is because we had a similar mindset, whether that was right or wrong, we didn't really care. We were having fun. And, that was...
How did you keep ratings and rankings out of the conversation? Because if she's not winning, that means her ratings and rankings are not going in the proper direction.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing too is sometimes you just get lucky with timing. So when she started, she started doing this. She was 10, so she was playing in Austria, and then mainly under 12s, a few sort of like still green ball tournaments, under 11s, because she was playing with the one hand, but very, very few of those. She was mainly playing under 12s and in Austria, and starting to play, Tennis Europe under 12s and things like this. So, she wasn't, you had a year there where I always treated this year as basically like if you used it in like a college terms, it would be like a gap year. Whereas if you had any type of idea, this was a great year to try it. So I basically thought, I'm like, look, this year, it doesn't matter what, if she played with two hands or she did this, she's not going to beat these top kids. So who cares? And I thought, because of the structure she had at home, that she had a massive advantage being the youngest kid. So she was the youngest. Her older sister Emma was an excellent player. So she, being the youngest, she had to hit with Emma, and then she would hit with her older brother, who was a little bit older. And then her mum and dad were also very keen tennis players. Their dad was still playing Bundesliga at the time. I think it was plus 45s or something like that. And so Lilli had all these people to hit with. And I think I was just looking at it and I was thinking, like, look, this girl's going to get enough opportunities to groove this in, whereas I don't think it's going to take her longer than a year. So while, people might say, well, Mark, that's a risky strategy to have with a 10-year-old kid. My sort of answer would be, I was like, yeah, but if you want to climb the mountain, you're going to have to take some risks along the way. And I thought, the sooner you do it, and if you can get it all kind of nailed down by the time this girl's finished by under 12s or something like that, then I'm like, do it now. Don't put these things off. And I just saw, we're just very lucky with the timing that I thought, you know what, 1 year she wins, she loses, who cares? Doesn't
It was
matter.
very, very interesting to watch. I admittedly only watched her final match at Roland Garros, but her opponent, who I have seen play numerous times, didn't do the high loopy thing to the backhand like you were talking about. And I kept thinking to myself, because I remember when Nadal first came on the scene and was trying to figure out how to beat Federer. And once he figured out the high loopy ball to the backhand, the whole narrative changed, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the great thing about like tennis at a higher level though, is speed kills. And when you have a girl like Lilli who's great build and playing very confidently, owning girls on the first serve, using a very big forehand and using an all court game. And this is one of the things I always saw at a young age is what you have then is you have someone who they don't see every day.
Right.
And if you take not to, this is not like any type of criticism of women's tennis or anything, is I always thought, as I'm like, why don't you be the one person that everyone else has to adjust to? So if everyone's going to nail two-handers cross court and play flat and not come to the net and not play with any type of variety, that's cool. Okay, that's fine. That's maybe their tennis. But what happens if you can come to the net, you take the ball early, you can generate more spin on one hand than another girl can with a flat two-hander. You've got the ability to slice. You throw them some type of game style, which they don't see. So, okay, great. You play a girl in a big match like she played in the final, and this girl's playing against basically everyone's just playing the same brand of tennis. And then you have to adjust to a very confident, natural shot maker at the top of her game. Then good luck with that. And that's one of the great gifts that you always hope she would develop and be able to show on a big stage is you've just got so much game where you can just take the racket out of the other girl's hand and
And let's be clear, she won that final 2-0. Like it wasn't even
yeah,
close.
I've been this week, it's just some people who know that, had good relationship with her have just said, it was great to see like Lilli do that. Is like, you must be surprised. I'm like, no, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, the only thing that surprised me was she did it at the French Open first, because I would have thought, the first place might have been like somewhere like Wimbledon or the US Open, where you got quick court, big serve, and her natural game is moving forward in the court. But she always showed, she's been working with Schiavone and the Italians for years, and she's got every element to play extremely well on clay as well. So, but just great performance, awesome to see, and I just love that it was done in a different way that you wouldn't traditionally see, but also as well that women play very well like that. And I think it's also unfair that people, coaches or whatever, they might pigeonhole girl tennis players and say, you're playing girls tennis and girls tennis is this and that. Whereas, okay, I just completely disagree with that. And I don't think it's fact. And it's always something I tried to like nail into Lilli was, okay, people might say that you have to do this, but I was always very interested in outside opinion or creative ways of trying to gain an edge. And one of the things I always used to tell her was like, look, Craig O'Shaughnessy puts out data every tournament, which is showing you how effective it is to play at the net. Now, at the time, she's probably thinking, what is this guy telling me? But basically, all I was trying to do is, look, everyone else might emphasize the baseline. And while I'm not saying the baseline isn't important, it is. I'm saying, look, you can go to the net and you love going to the net. So let everyone else do this. Why don't you do that?
Be a disruptor.
This was, this was one of the ways too, where I was always thought where it was, there's different ways to gain an advantage.
Yeah.
Okay. And everyone chooses the same way. And it's just like, well, we're going to do like the total opposite.
I love it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Lilli's transition from your coaching to the next stage. What happened, or did something happen that caused both parties, Lilli and her family being one party, you being the other party, to come to the realization that it was time for a different coach?
I mean, there's a huge problem with the distance. And I had a young family at the time, 2 young sons, and also a lot of other young kids who were ambitious with their tennis, and we had a great training group. And you had the time as well with COVID and all the craziness happening around 2020, 2021, all this type of stuff. And it was one of those things where you could keep it up as much as possible, but we're always like, look, this distancing, this is hard. And we talked as well, like very openly. It was like, look, okay, if we can't do this anymore, what are some options you think would be good for Lilli? And 2 options I always said is, I said, okay, I would look at the French or the Italians, because if you look at like the styles of players that would be produced in Italy and France, I just had it was just my view that they would let her be herself, and they would give her the license to, do her crazy things, let her be her and develop her, and not try and put her into a box. And my biggest fear with Lilli was, maybe don't give her, and this is nothing against, it's not a personal attack on people, but don't give her to, say, like a German, Swiss, or Austrian type coach who would be very precise, which is a good thing. But I thought for her, you need a type of that sideways mentality, which, it's the French and the Italians produce very flamboyant players. And I thought that would be a great fit for her. And she spent actually 1 week at Moratoglu's place in 2020, where they just checked her out. And, they thought very highly of her as well. And, eventually it's like, it was time for her. Her potential was so great as well that, I just run a very small place here. I work by myself. And, I think if it was a good decision by her family at that time to say, look, this worked really well, but, you got a 12-year-old kid, and you can't put her in a car and drive her, 90 minutes. Sometimes, if there's a full snowstorm, it might take 2 hours to get here. You can't do that at that age, where she really needed to start stepping on the gas, and to step on the gas and really train for, especially as a girl, where you've kind of got to do it a little bit earlier as a girl. Mm-hmm. And her parents made a decision and had a great, had a good contacts in South Tyrol and in Italy. And I think it was like a perfect fit for her. And, her future success shows that, it's a very smart call, like, by her parents. And, I just thought, all the best. I just hope she would keep going and eventually come through. And she has. It's just great to see.
And did she go straight to Schiavone at that point, or
no? She actually, I think it was. I can't actually quite recall where she went, but it was in South Tyrol. I think it was with. I hope I'm going to pronounce this correctly. Max Sartori, who worked with Andreas Seppi, and just had very good contacts within that little Yannick Sinner circle. So Lilli was, she's from Lyon, so that's very close. That's an eastern part of Tyrol, which is close to South Tyrol, which is part of Italy. If you can, if your listeners can understand that, but it's a short European geography lesson right there. So it's a great little like melting pot part of the world for tennis. And so that's where she was there for a couple of years and did very well and developed very well there. And eventually, as all big talents do, you get discovered by the big names in the sport. And I think, it seems like a great mix, putting Lilli with together with someone like Francesca Schiavone, with the experience, and obviously as well, the similarity with, if you just took the look at the one-hand and backhand.
Yeah. You mentioned early on in our conversation that it was important to you that she develop a work ethic, and that you felt like making that change from the two hands to the one hand was going to be a stepping stone towards that work ethic development. I want to talk a little bit more about that, because we often talk about, tennis is a microcosm of life. Kids are learning lessons on the tennis court that are going to help them out in the big bad world, and work ethic is one of those elements. When you're working with a 10-year-old child, 9-year-old child with childlike sensibilities, childlike desires, childlike attention span, but in Lilli's case, not really childlike attention span, not really childlike sensibilities, because she had this mission that she had set for herself. How did you incorporate the life lessons into the tennis?
That's a very, very good question. No one's ever asked me that. I would say
it's an important piece of being a coach to a young player, right?
It is. I mean, the way I thought of it was, I'd always trained players very intensely. So I'd work with a lot of young kids who were very ambitious in tennis. Some older junior players as well, and things like that. And I always thought, okay, kids should understand that time is precious, and their parents are paying good money for this. And there's your time and energy, and there were only so much you could get of both. And when I just was starting to work a little bit with Lilli by herself, I mean, the girl would make me laugh, because I wasn't really used to having like this little precocious little kid have her own ideas about what was, I guess you could say, like an acceptable training. Because I mean, if you said to her, is like, look, we're gonna do this from the basket, etc., you knew the girl just wanted to play mini tennis against you, or come on, Mark, let's play one-on-one volleys, or whatever idea she had in her mind. And I mean, while you never want to take away like those childlike things, I would always, after working with her, and might be in the middle of working with her older brother and her older sister, I would just be thinking like, I think like I've wasted 20 minutes of whatever time I had, like there. And I was just thinking like, is it my fault because I'm not I'm doing something wrong, or how's the kid trying to think about tennis and things like that? And that's where I just I just thought, it's if you just found a way in there to mix the hard work with the obvious passion and talent, that if you did that, you wouldn't even have to say anything. And this was the case as well. It's like, look, if you just made that one huge leap or huge discovery or whatever unlock it is in the brain, that the player in question, even if it was a 10-year-old kid, maybe they would understand this, and they would just take it and run with it. And she had like the tennis IQ. I mean, if you watched her play matches at that time, you wouldn't think this girl had tennis IQ. But she knew the game. She was from a tennis family, and the minute she changed, and then you started practicing with her, you didn't have to tell Lilli anything. Lilli knew. She's like, I've got this new toy, and I want this toy to be unbelievable. And you didn't have to say, look, we're going to hit an extra basket, or I want your sister to, like nail forehands inside out on your backhand, so you learn how to do A, B, or C. She she would make the suggestion to you.
Wow.
And, that's why you had the feeling as a coach is like, okay, I don't need to say anything here. All I have to do is I need to get out of this kid's way, guide them, help them. In her case, it wasn't then getting her to go and practice. It was like, Lilli, maybe you just need to calm down a bit here. Maybe you've done a little bit too much. But that's part of it as well. I mean, she loved to play. So perfect day for her was being on court all day. And at that time, if you were trying to develop what she was going to develop, it was a perfect mix. So I think it just kind of, it's a really, really good question when you're talking about with like young kids. And in that case, it just happened by accident, so but it's, no one's ever asked me that.
I mean, you say that, and I'm going to just put it out there that if you hadn't stepped out of her way, it might not have happened the way it happened. So there was a realization at some point for yourself that I've got a special kid here. I need to, yes, guide her, and there's some things that I can offer to teach her to help her get to where she wants to be. But at the same time, I have to be careful not to impose my values too hard, because that's going to interfere with her ability to trust herself and keep pushing forward.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I just think as well as I've always, even at a young age, tennis is a player's sport. And one of the things is, as a coach, that's always bugged me over the years is, and my personal feeling for this is I blame the internet, is you have coaches promoting themselves in a certain way, trying to take credit for certain things or ideas or trends and things like this. And I'm always of the opinion, I was like, no, the players are the people who know. So the players invent things. They try things under pressure. They see what works. And I always thought, if you're a smart coach, you would then look at what they were doing and you would try and understand maybe why they were trying to do it. And if you could understand it, how you could then relate that into whoever you were working with. And, I think that was with her too. I always had this thing in the back of my mind. And I just remember like Nick Bollettieri saying it when he started working with Boris Becker. And I think Nick went 2 weeks working with Boris Becker when they began, and he didn't say anything. I think Boris Becker went up to him one day and he said, look, are you going to coach me? And his answer was, well, if I have something to say where I think it'll add value, then I'll say it. Now, I probably got that story a little bit mixed up, but I'm pretty sure it went something along those lines. And I just felt like also my own experiences as a kid playing tennis, where I could see certain similarities with Lilli and the way I like to play as a kid and the way she liked to play. And I just didn't want these things getting coached out of her or having her being bombarded with too much information. I thought a much better use of time was to say, look, you're going to play up on the baseline for the next 2 hours against your sister. Maybe in 10 minutes, we'll go get a drink. I want you to concentrate. I want you to move your feet. And I want you to make enough balls where your sister's not going to get annoyed at you. And though sometimes, would that be every session? No, it wouldn't be every session. But sometimes some very uncomplicated instruction like that to a young kid that gives them the freedom to then be like, oh, okay, cool. We're going to do that today. Yeah, I can do that, Mark. Whereas if you're a little kid and you're like, well, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do that, you're just going to be frozen in time and you don't know what's going on. I mean, tennis is hard enough as it is without trying to deal with unnecessary distractions. And I just think as well, that's maybe why, some coaches with a certain mentality will fit well with certain players. And we just had a good understanding of those things. And sometimes nothing needed to be said. And that worked well for us. Whereas if you'd maybe been a different type of kid with another mentality, that type of guidance or those types of ideas would have been completely wrong. And again, that's the great thing about the sport. people can coach it in different ways. Kids can develop themselves, their tennis in different ways. And you have, a million different ways of skinning a cat. And you've got to find if you find that right sort of mix of the cocktail, and then that's where you get those magic things that come through, where you get players like Lilli developing, and then, just taking their own ideas and running with it, and, playing with confidence on a big stage. And, that's all you can ever wish for.
I want to ask you about one more aspect of Lilli's game and whether or not you had a role in that. One of the things I noticed watching her play was she's very calm on the court. She, at the beginning of the match, I think the first 3 games, they had multiple deuces in each of the first 3 games of that match of the final. And sometimes Lilli had the ad, sometimes Hannah had the ad, but it was going back and forth for like 5-6 minutes per game. Neither of the girls ever lost their cool, at least that the TV camera captured that I could see. How do you coach that? Or did you coach that? Or was that something she came to you with?
No, that wasn't something that I did with her. We didn't really work on that true mental side of it. Partly because you had enough on your plate with trying to develop a shot, a game style, things like this. Now, were you, as a coach, were you aware of this side of it? Of course, you're always looking at the mental side of the game. And there were periods where, she would show some tendencies on the court, which you were like, okay, she'll need some help with that. And the great thing about being in the tennis environment she made her way into in Italy is watching her play now, as you can see, the unbelievable work they did with her to calm her down on the court. Lilli was never a racket thrower. But where there were some sort of interesting little things which she needed to overcome, and they helped her with that. And you just saw that at Roland Garros. You saw someone who looked like they had been playing in front of a big stage for the last 5 years, instead of maybe being only in her second season of playing junior Grand Slams. So that's something that she worked on in Italy, and she's seeing the benefits of that now.
And the joy came out. I mean, as
Exactly.
soon as she won that match, the smile just lit up the entire stadium. She was smiling at her coach. She was smiling at the fans. The net exchange with her opponent was lovely. She's the whole package, and I really hope I get to see her play at the Junior US Open this year. I will for sure be seeking out her court when I'm there.
Yeah, no. The girl's going to sell a lot of tickets in the years to come, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. Mark, anything else you want to share with us before I let you get back to your family?
No, I mean, that's basically the extent of the involvement I had with Lilli, and just the fact that I think it's a great story in tennis, because it was an incredibly hard thing to do. It was the right thing to do, and it was something that made sense for the individual. And I think as well, if you look at many things in life, and we're using tennis in this aspect, I mean, is you can take the easy, comfortable road, which could get you some success for a period of time, but eventually, at the end of the day, you're probably going to run into some type of roadblock. Whereas I just always thought this was just such a great story, because, going from 2 to 1 hand, being a girl, doing it at a young age, it's, you just think this is insane. But it just made so much sense, and it felt so right for her to do it. And honestly, I hope if there's other girls out there who are being told, you can't do this, or you can't do this because it's a girl, I think it would be great too if they said, well, there's this young girl from Austria and she's doing this and she did it and this is how I want to play. And it's my tennis and it's my decision, and whether it works or not, they're okay with that. And I just think that would be a great attitude, that if more kids were given the freedom to do that and then did it, I think you would get junior tennis would be a lot healthier from a mental perspective for kids, because I think you would have kids playing a style they truly enjoyed, whether they ended up winning or losing, because they would enjoy it. I think they would stay in the sport longer. They would probably train more effectively, and there would be an easier relationship between them and the whole sport. So I think, like someone like Lilli's a great case study, is because she did the hard thing and she did it early, but in making the decision, she was incredibly true to herself and her own wishes. So yeah, I hope more kids are able to try and follow what she did.
Love it. And Mark has graciously offered to make himself available via email, and I will share his email address in the show notes. So be sure and check those out at ParentingAces.com. But Mark, it has been such a pleasure to meet you, and I thank you for reaching out, and I'm so glad we could make this happen. And if you end up at the US Open this year, maybe we'll get to meet in person, but I will definitely seek out Lilli.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love to do that, Lisa. And thanks for giving me the time to maybe get Lilli's story across to an American audience who doesn't really know of it. And yeah, it's most appreciated.
Absolutely. To my audience, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on Parenting Aces.